they were attempting to create facts on the ground, to make some form of big spectacle, grab a bunch of Ukrainian territory right before Putin met Trump, so that he could then say to Trump, hey, look at us, we're winning quite handily, and you might as well push the Ukrainians to surrender or to come to terms that are far more favorable to us than what the Ukrainians want to agree to. And you saw the Russians take advantage of this to push, a few thousand troops up northeast of Dobropilia, but they outran their artillery support, they outran their drone support, and then obviously the Ukrainians managed to counterattack and cut their supply lines off. And now you're seeing these pockets of troops being systematically reduced by the Ukrainians.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio. I'm Louis Sykes. Today we're joined from Kiev, Ukraine by geopolitics and security analyst Jimmy Rushton. Jimmy, thank you very much for joining us again.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Jimmy, I should start by asking how you are. Massive strikes overnight in Kiev. What's the situation there now?
So yeah, I'm fine, a little bit sleep deprived, but to be honest, it's nothing that I haven't encountered before. It's very, very noisy. We had hundreds of Shahids, cruise missiles, air ballistic missiles fired at the capital and other targets inside Ukraine. Half of the city, the left bank of the city, because Kiev, for people that don't know, is divided by the river Dnipro. It's a massive river, and half the city is on one side and half the city is on the other side. And the left bank is currently without power and water, although that should be restored probably within a day. But yeah, a little bit sleep deprived, but not doing too bad, all things considered.
Well, it's good to hear that you're doing well and that there's still the capability to recover from these sort of strikes. How concerned should we be about the possibility of increasing strikes by Russia on Ukraine? I mean, was this one larger than most? Are we expecting it to build as we head into winter?
This one was about average. I would say we're probably expecting another campaign of targeted strikes on Ukraine's power infrastructure. This isn't the first time the Russians have tried to do this. Going back to October 2022, there was a major campaign of strikes against energy infrastructure, power stations, and the grid here. And Ukraine is prepared now. I would say the grid is probably more resilient than it was back then. So we're expecting power outages. But again, it's nothing we haven't experienced before. Everyone here is now far more prepared. People have power banks, generators. And yeah, the Ukrainian electrical engineers are geniuses. They managed to bring stuff back online that you'd think would take a decade to restore. Some power stations, for example, that got hit by multiple cruise missiles that they just managed to get back up and running somehow.
And of course, out east, the Russian offensive on Ukraine and the Donbas continues. Putin this week has claimed that Russia has managed to gain 5,000 square kilometers. The ISW says that's probably incorrect and puts the real figure somewhere around 3,400 square kilometers. Is that really enough for Putin to kind of be able to show to his generals, the Kremlin, the Russian population, that Russia is still moving forwards at a sufficient rate in this war, especially considering the casualties?
No, it's not even close to being sufficient. We had some incredible, and I do mean incredible in the literal sense of that word, intelligence estimates from the Americans that said that Russia might be able to capture the entirety of the Donbas in October of this year. I mean, that's not going to happen. They still haven't managed to take Pokrovsk. They're still trying to take Konstantinivka, or they're trying to encircle Konstantinivka. And they're suffering horrendous casualties for all of this territory that they're taking. And to be honest, if they take 5,000 square kilometers or they take 3,400 square kilometers, it really doesn't make that much difference. They're no closer to bringing this war to an end on their terms, and they could keep fighting like this for a while, but it's not sustainable. They can't take the amount of losses that they're taking for the amount of territory that they're taking for this to be a sustainable war for the Russians.
Yeah, exactly. And we've actually seen some pretty significant, if only on the tactical level, tactical victories in the defense from Ukraine up near Dobropilia, which of course is near Pokrovsk that you mentioned there. Around 3,000 Russian casualties as part of a drive forwards by the Russians. Hundreds of troops now cut off by Azov Corps. Is there something in this for the Ukrainians to feel that they are maintaining some sort of defensive edge in this war, even if the Russians are able to continue creeping forwards?
I mean, it's always easier to fight on the defensive, especially in a war where it's dominated by long range fires and drones. What I would say in regards to this Russian attempt to push to the northeast of Dobropilia, this was something that they tried to do in the run up to the Alaska summit. And it seemed to me that they were attempting to create facts on the ground, to make some form of big spectacle, grab a bunch of Ukrainian territory right before Putin met Trump, so that he could then say to Trump, hey, look at us, we're winning quite handily, and you might as well push the Ukrainians to surrender or to come to terms that are far more favorable to us than what the Ukrainians want to agree to. I would say that this demonstrates inherent weakness in the Ukrainian lines, because there aren't enough people on the lines, and this is, and to be honest, this is the case for both sides. Both sides are suffering from manpower shortages, and on both sides, you don't really have like a fixed front line anymore. You have small pockets of troops on either side, and then you have large areas of contested space where groups of soldiers can penetrate in each direction, and it's kind of chaotic. And you saw the Russians take advantage of this to push, a few thousand troops up northeast of Dobropilia, but they outran their artillery support, they outran their drone support, and then obviously the Ukrainians managed to counterattack and cut their supply lines off. And now you're seeing these pockets of troops being systematically reduced by the Ukrainians. The Russians are still attempting to resupply them via drone, and in some cases they are, but they're in a very difficult situation.
And how much should we put that down to the new Ukrainian core system in this ability to perhaps do a bit more maneuver than we've seen in this war previously? Or is this more just Russian tactical doctrine just being a bit out of date?
I mean, I think it was a case of the Russian military being told to do something to fulfill a political objective. And obviously, all war is political, but if you have very short term political objectives, which Putin clearly did going into this meeting with Trump, and you tell your military to do this, it didn't make military sense to try and push all these troops up so far without sufficient support. And you're seeing the outcome of that now. In regards to the core reforms, obviously, I think they're a good thing. In regards to Azov, they're one of the most capable brigades in the Ukrainian military. They've routinely been deployed to some of the most difficult sections of the front. They act in a firefighting capacity, really. That when and there's a few brigades like this as well. The 47th Mechanized is another brigade that does this sort of thing. They're sent to the hottest sections of the front to stabilize areas where the Ukrainian resistance is faltering, and that's exactly what they did here. And yeah, they're very, very tough fighters, Azov guys.
And you, last we spoke, had been just returned from your time with, I believe it was Third Army Corps, as they were adapting to this new system. Have you been writing or doing any more on that element of the Ukrainian military, and what can you tell us about their successes?
I've been speaking. I speak frequently with guys from Third Army Corps. Yesterday I spent some time with one of their senior advisors. And yeah, they're fighting around Izium. They're being pressed very, very hard by the Russians at the moment. Russia had expected, or maybe not expected, but the possibility of Ukrainian assault in that area was something that was playing on the Russians' mind. So they maintained a reserve, and now what they're doing is they're releasing those reserves to attack the positions of Third Assault in that area. So they are under severe pressure at the moment, but they're holding the line. Again, they're very good fighters. They're probably the most effective fighting force in the Ukrainian military. They're bigger than Azov, and they're part of the regular military, so they have access to all of the heavy armaments that a standard Ukrainian military unit would have. Azov, just to clarify that Azov are actually part of the National Guard.
Mhm.
So there are some parts of they're not really supposed to have tanks. I mean, they do have tanks, but they're not supposed to have tanks. So yeah, it's slightly arcane the way the Ukrainian military is organized. But yeah, Third Army Corps, Third Assault Brigade, very capable guys, and good leadership as well. That's one thing that always struck me. Their commanders are very effective. Definitely got to their positions because of ability, not because of connections or because of some shady underhand dealing, which can be the case in some brigades.
And one of the biggest stories out of the war in Ukraine at the moment is the continued crippling of Russia's oil infrastructure by Ukraine using these long range strike capabilities, a mixture of drones, the new FP5 Flamingo missiles, and other systems. There's an estimated 20 to 40% of oil production has been taken offline at this point, and there's no sign of Ukraine lifting their bombardment, is there?
No, just to be completely clear, they haven't been using the Flamingo to hit oil refineries yet. They might do at some point in the future, but it's still it's gained initial operating capability, so they've used a few of them, but they haven't been using them against oil refineries. They've been using generally drones, their long range one way attack drones to hit these refineries because, to be honest, you don't actually need a massive explosive payload to cause a lot of damage to a refinery because it's obviously full of highly combustible material. So you hit it in the right place, and generally they hit these cracking units, so the key refinery towers, which are very sensitive pieces of equipment. So, yeah, no, they've been doing a very good job. We're seeing queues across Russia for petrol. They've lost 38% of their refining capability. There seems to be talk that they're going to have to start importing petrol, which is astonishing, really, considering Russia's natural reserves of hydrocarbons. So, yeah, no, it's been very successful, and it will continue because there's no reason for the Ukrainians not to hit these targets. They're very, very appetizing targets for a Ukrainian drone.
And is this the sort of strategy that will really start to worry Putin and the Kremlin? Because there is a heavy reliance by Russia for almost everything on its oil industry, isn't there?
Of course, I mean, oil is the lifeblood of any military. You can't really do that much without oil unless you go back to horses, which in some cases the Russians are actually doing. But it's yeah, no, it's definitely going to be worrying him. The pictures and videos of these massive queues for petrol across Russia are definitely going to be worrying Putin because it really brings the reality of the war home to your ordinary Russian when he can't fill up his car. And again, remember, Russia is a huge country, so if you're living in an isolated region in Russia and you can't get petrol, you can't really do anything. So it's very difficult, and it's definitely going to be worrying the Kremlin.
And the expansion in these strikes is presumably backed by an expansion in the development of the Ukrainian arms industry. Has there been quite a lot of success by Zelensky and the Ukrainian government in drawing investment into the Ukrainian military industrial complex?
There has. I mean, you're seeing. I think this is the Ukrainian drone program is domestic, and it's not really the result of foreign investment. In fact, generally, foreign drones are inferior to Ukrainian drones. So what you're seeing is the Ukrainians saw what the Russians were doing with these Iranian supplied Shahid drones, which were introduced in October 2022. And they copied them, or they copied the concept, and they produced their own multiple versions of their own. And yeah, you're seeing the fruits of that endeavor now. The thing for Russia as well, it's actually Russia's a very, very big country, obviously, and that can be good if you're defending against a land invasion. But if you're having to defend against drones, missiles, aircraft, for example, it works against you because you have so much more territory that you need to cover with air defenses, and Russia is suffering a shortage of air defense interceptors at the moment. Everyone talks about the fact that it's difficult for Ukraine to defend against all these munitions, but it's also very difficult for Russia to defend against these munitions. And you saying that they can't defend against these munitions because despite the fact that these oil refineries are well-known targets and Russia would seem to have every incentive to defend them, Ukrainian drones are still getting through.
And the drone war is effectively now spilling out of Ukraine and into the rest of Europe, thanks obviously to these Russian incursions that we keep seeing. On the reaction to drones from European nations, Merz has come out this week and said they believe Russia is behind all of these incursions, the mysterious drones that are appearing in countries like Denmark. Um, is it up to Germany now to really lead the charge on the response to this?
I mean, I don't think it's just up to Germany. I think every country in Europe needs to be aware of this. The amount of economic damage that you can do by shutting down an airport with a few consumer level drones is astonishing. And yeah, of course, it's the Russians behind it. Everyone knows this. If you speak to anyone off the record, they'll say, "Yeah, of course it is." We know that the Russians are behind this. I think in some cases, governments don't want to attribute directly to Russia because they feel that if they point the finger at Russia directly, then there's going to be the inevitable question: well, what are you going to do about it? You know, if you acknowledge Russian bad behavior, then pressure is on you to respond. And at the moment, governments really are sticking their heads in the sand, and we're seeing very, very weak responses to this kind of grey zone activity. And again, we've seen with Russia, if you're weak in regarding Russian aggression, Russian misbehavior, you just encourage more of it. So what Russia has seen with these drone incursions is A, it's effective. B, they're not going to get punished. So why wouldn't they do it again? You'd be crazy not to do it again from a Russian perspective because it works. It's very, very cheap, and it seems to have no risk to you.
And we've talked about the situation Russia now faces in Ukraine. It is not an ideal one. The oil shortages and energy infrastructure attacks. No serious success for quite some time in their offensive in the Donbas. Is that likely to push Russia to back down or escalate as their position in Ukraine gets worse elsewhere on the world stage?
Difficult question. I think they'll try and they're going to keep the incremental approach to their war in Ukraine. So they're going to keep trying to take as much territory as possible. But I think there's a ticking timer on that. I don't think that it's sustainable for them in the long term. It's probably sustainable for them in the short to medium term, but I think maybe two years maximum. You're seeing increasing fragility in the Russian economy, and the Russians themselves will admit this. And you're seeing manpower shortages on the Russian side as well. It's not just Ukraine that's suffering from manpower shortages; both sides are. So, yeah, I think part of this drone incursion campaign is to raise the temperature, and it's almost like a Hail Mary. They want to do anything they can to discourage Western support for Ukraine, try and raise the risk or perceived risk, because really there isn't any risk to supplying Ukraine with weapons, because Russia isn't going to directly attack NATO countries, especially not while it's engaged in Ukraine, because it knows it would lose. So. Yeah, I think they're going to keep doing this. You're going to keep seeing Russian misbehavior. And to be honest, until we start retaliating in kind or retaliating via, asymmetric measures, but asymmetric measures that actually hurt Moscow, they're going to keep misbehaving.
And so, is there an answer to the Russian drone threat, whether that's in Ukraine itself or the wider threat in Europe? Is there an answer to that threat within the Ukrainian military industry? Because we've seen a lot of effort going into producing things like interceptor drones, jamming systems, this kind of ongoing frequency war. Do the Ukrainians have the answer yet, do we think?
Jamming systems, no. Interceptors, potentially. It's a technological problem, and there's a technological solution. I would say that in regards to the Shahid one-way attack drones that Russia uses, interceptor drones are the answer to that, because there are far too many of these Shahid drones to be countered via either manned aircraft or surface-to-air missiles. It's just uneconomic to do that. So interceptor drones is one key answer to that problem. Also, anti-aircraft artillery, old-fashioned anti-aircraft artillery, preferably radar-guided. We're seeing some high-spec German systems come into Ukraine, the Sky Ranger systems. They seem to be very effective. And this is something actually that all militaries need to get on board with. the British military has no anti-aircraft artillery, for example. All of our anti-aircraft armament on ground is surface-to-air missiles. We obviously have the RAF, but we have no anti-aircraft artillery. So that's something we need to seriously consider, because it's not sustainable to expend multi-million-dollar missiles to shoot down a Shahid drone, which costs $50,000. It's just unsustainable.
And meanwhile, on the other side of the Atlantic, we're continuing to see a sort of cautious shift towards Kiev by the White House. Zelensky has now said that he will nominate Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize if he can get an end to the war in Ukraine. What do you make of that? Are we seeing Trump finally coming pretty securely on side with Kiev, or should we still be worried about the White House zigging and zagging on this conflict?
I mean, I'd always be worried about Trump, but in regards to what Zelensky is talking about, I mean, it's smart diplomacy. Trump really, really wants a Nobel Prize, and if he gets a peace deal which is favourable to the Ukrainians, and give him what he wants. The Nobel Prize was developed as a way to launder the reputation of the manufacture of dynamite. So, really, I mean, obviously, it's become to mean something, but fundamentally, it was a PR exercise. Use it for its intended purpose, and just give it to Trump if he does, or promise to give it to Trump to persuade him to be more pro-Ukrainian, or to enact policy which is more pro-Ukrainian. Because I actually don't really care whether he likes or hates Ukraine, as long as his policy towards Ukraine is favorable to this country. And that's the thing with him. He can do stuff for the wrong reasons, like the supply of weapons to Ukraine. Like, NATO countries are paying for them now. But the thing is, these NATO countries are generally paying for them via the profits of frozen Russian assets, so that they take the interest from these frozen Russian assets, they buy American weapons, and they give them to Ukraine. And for the Ukrainians, they don't care whether these weapons were donated by the Americans or purchased via frozen Russian funds. All they care about is the weapons arrive. So that's a classic example of Trump doing the right thing for the wrong reasons. But it doesn't really matter. We have to take a pragmatic approach to this. And if you can persuade him to do the right thing by the promise of giving him a Nobel Peace Prize, then do it. It's a meaningless piece of paper at the end of the day.
And the Trump's, as we're speaking, Trump's other chance for the Nobel Peace Prize seems to have just passed. He has not been nominated this year for, as he hoped, for seemingly getting a ceasefire or possibly a lasting peace in the Israel-Gaza conflict. Does the end of that conflict, or at least a cessation in the current conflict, does it refocus minds on European and thus ultimately Ukrainian security, do you think?
Well, so in regards to this year's Nobel Prize, nominations opened or they were made in January. So there was no chance of him getting it this year. For sure. The fact that the war in Gaza is winding down, or it seems to be winding down, is definitely good news for Ukraine, because it distracted a lot of attention. It also diverted arms, which were actually going to be sent to Ukraine at one point, and they were used in Israel. They were used in Qatar as well, because obviously the Iran-Israel conflict kind of span off from the Gaza conflict, although obviously it wasn't directly connected. But it was only the destruction of Hezbollah and Iran's proxy networks that probably gave Israel the latitude to engage in a full scale, or not a full scale, but an overt military action against Iran. So yeah, it's obviously good news, and it's good news for both sides in Israel and Palestine as well, because that war was absolutely horrific, and far too many people on both sides have died.
Well, Jimmy Rushton, geopolitics and security analyst based in Kiev, Ukraine, thank you very much for joining us today on Frontline.
Thank you for having me.
You've been watching or listening to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Louis Sykes. For more on the war in Ukraine, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and sign up for a membership, or you can hear all the latest news and analysis on Times Radio, or read it at thetimes.com. And remember, we are in both podcast and video form. You can find us on your favourite podcast platform. It's Times Radio's Frontline, or you can watch us on Times Radio's YouTube channel. Thanks very much. Goodbye.